Hello and welcome to Türkiye Talks. Turkey's elections, now we passed the first stage. We are heading to runoff. I'm joined by Kadir Ustun as always. Kadir, I think you have been here during the elections. What do you think about the results? Have you expected such a result? The presidential elections will be done again. It's going to be a runoff between the two the leading candidates. President Erdogan and Kilicdaroglu will run again. And also in the parliament, we have seen that right-wing votes dominated. So let's start with the presidential elections first. Did you expect this result?
This result is better than I expected for President Erdogan. I expected a much closer race, maybe 1 or 2 points between the two main candidates, especially because the fourth candidate, Muharrem İnce, had pulled out, and you would expect his voters to go to Kilicdaroglu, at least most of them, but that doesn't seem to have happened. President Erdogan was just shy of the 50%. I think it amounts to something like 300,000 votes or something like that. So it wasn't a lot more that he needed, but a very comfortable margin, more than about 2.5 million votes, difference between the two candidates. And that amounts to something like 5% difference. So President Erdogan is heading into the second round in a much more comfortable position, and I expect a much wider margin because the opposition is literally in disarray. They're oscillating between blaming various things, even claiming some election fraud that doesn't seem to have happened in any significant way. There are always mistakes in, adding up numbers and etc. And they're, the way they ran their election campaign on that day, I can't find the words, but I'm sorry to say this, but it was literally dismal. The mayors, Istanbul mayor and Ankara mayor, appeared in front of TVs early on and claimed that they were ahead, whereas there was no evidence for that. And then there were many other messages that were just showing that they were in disarray. I'm mentioning this to argue that election day performance matters a lot. Turning out the vote, bringing voters to the ballot box, and then staying there until the end, when people are counting the votes. That's very important. And AK Party has millions of people who were trying their best to get out the vote and also be there at the ballot box. I also want to mention, there's a lot of speculation outside the country. They just don't understand the election system. In this election system, it's really, really extremely difficult, if not impossible, to do widespread fraud. There is, 190,000 ballot boxes. Each ballot box has all the party members' representatives, and they have officials who are supposed to be non-partisan. They are appointed by the state, paid for by the state, and you have volunteer observers from all parties. And in major cities where most of the votes are, these ballot boxes are being protected by often dozen people. And I went with my sister who was going to vote, and I saw things happening in action. And they check your national ID card. In the US, for instance, that's the whole other debate. They should check your national ID card. They give you your ballot. You have to, mark it, put it in an envelope, put it in the ballot, and then when it's opened, all party members have to approve, agree on a sheet of paper that yes, these are the numbers of votes for each party, and then they have to sign it and then seal the ballots, and then report it to the election council, which tallies up the numbers. But the parties themselves also get those numbers because everybody is taking their pictures, those receipts, and tallying them up. That night, CHP promised a website where you can go in and check your own election district to see the numbers, but they couldn't even get that website up and running. And at the end of the day, it was basically seal of approval for President Erdogan in a serious way. Basically, Kilicdaroglu's campaign lacked a clear message. They said many things. It didn't add up to a coherent message. Kilicdaroglu's candidacy itself was in dispute. In dispute meaning his own coalition partners didn't think that he was electable. And that was a big debate. You remember, no need to go into details. And at the end, and the third thing is mobilization in that day, getting out to vote, right? The message, the messenger, and the mobilization. So on all those accounts, basically, AK Party was the better team, and they finished ahead. And heading into the second round, I expect even a wider margin because the opposition is now quite demoralized. And then, since people were voting for parties as well, they went to the polls to vote for their party while also voting for the presidential candidate. But in the second round, it will only be the presidential election, and it will only be Erdogan versus Kilicdaroglu. So many people will probably not show up because their party's emblem is not on the ballot box. And then, you will see AK Party people motivated to give Erdogan a really big win. And what is sad also, I'm sorry, I'm keeping this long, but past several days, I've made so many observations, took so many notes. What is sad is the opposition, instead of, coming to terms with the result and, think about what they've done wrong and prepare for the second round in a serious way, they're raising issues of, irregularities. They're raising issues of, blaming, trying to use harsh language. Kilicdaroglu just sent out a video on social media that is basically anti-immigrant. And so it's really sad to see the state of the opposition in that way. I understand when you're behind like this, you'll be demoralized, and you'll have big debates and discussions. But their mistake was probably to get everyone to believe that they were ahead and they were going to win anyway, comfortably. But if they prepare their voters for the scenario that it's going to go to the second round, maybe they wouldn't have been demoralized this much. So these are my observations, Bora. Sorry that made it so long.
But you brought it to the point that I was going to talk, actually. The expectation of the opposition was shaped through opinion polls during the last couple of months. Actually, during the last maybe a few years, every week we have seen a new opinion poll, and now it is clear that most of them were done not in a scientific way, or they were not credible enough, and they were not reflecting the reality on the ground. Actually, they were more manipulative. The aim was to shape the public opinion and create the image or the perception that the opposition is winning. And I think by using them as not a reflection of the situation, but as tools to, part of the campaign. Actually, the opinion polls were part of the campaign, and this misled the opposition leadership as well. There was a cycle. I tweeted about that. You have an opinion poll showing the results as you wish. News websites, they published it, they delivered it to everybody. Some journalists, they talked about that, and they created an image to, convince people that, we are the winning side. So, and this also was reflected to political leaders' speeches. Then, we have the situation. So I think most of the opposition members or supporters or voters, they were shocked that night when they saw President Erdogan was leading, and also they probably shocked when they saw their party is not gaining votes. CHP got similar votes as they did 5 years ago, despite many problems. As all of us know, we suffered a pandemic. Global economic crisis also affected Turkey. The earthquake, war against terror, we suffered as Turkey. We suffered a lot of stuff. So in a political life, in such country, you expect the opposition winning more votes, but it didn't happen. So I think this should be the subject that the opposition, would be discussing these days as we head to the next election. About runoff.
Yeah. Go ahead.
About the runoff, I was going to ask you about the 28th of May, but if you have something to say, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention the polls. Polls can be wrong. That happens everywhere in the world. But some of them are clearly manipulative, like you said. And then a lot of them, I think, they relied on certain frameworks, and, maybe they need to definitely check their sampling. They have to check their methods. But, the last couple weeks, when, AK Party has something like 11 to 12 million registered members, and they kept registering people for the party until the last minute. That ground operation is huge. People don't appreciate that, or don't recognize it. And I think when pollsters ask people, they're not necessarily hiding their beliefs in Turkey. I think they do speak to these people, but it's just probably there's a problem with reaching some of the voters, like MHP voters or some AK Party voters, in the way that they should. And mobilization really matters, and that for the opposition, it is a huge mistake to believe the story that you're telling before that story actually comes to true. In this case, that's what happened, right? They said Erdogan, because of all the mistakes he's done, that's their rhetoric, and their election campaign was built on this. All these problems you mentioned, the earthquake, recovery, the economic problems, and etc. They thought those would be enough for the government to change. But anywhere in the world, political scientists will tell you that the power changes hands only if the electorate believes in a better alternative. In this case, people were not convinced that Kilicdaroglu could solve these problems. And Kilicdaroglu's party got 25% of the vote, Bora. Presidential candidates' party's votes should increase, not decrease that much, right? Or at least I was just surprised by them something, I expected at least 28 to 30%, if not more, because, Kilicdaroglu's candidacy should give them a boost, but it didn't. And they also put, smaller parties' candidates on their lists, which means CHP ends up with 12 net loss in the count of MPs. So probably they calculated that they were going to get a big win, and those weren't going to matter. Those numbers were going to be different. But like I said, you can't start believing the story you're telling before that dream transpires. And you need to put, you really need to get the ground game running. You need to be everywhere. And we've seen in social media, anecdotally, I've heard it from many people. They say like CHP people didn't come here, so that's a big draw for them.
The new parliament, actually, some numbers have changed, but the nature of the parliament didn't. As you mentioned, still the People's Alliance, the ruling alliance, they have the majority in the parliament. So even if Kilicdaroglu won the elections in the presidential race, he wouldn't be in control of the parliament. So probably in Turkey, many people say people are more leaning to vote for the stability. So if you look from this perspective, can we say that in the runoff in the second round, do you think this margin between President Erdogan and Kilicdaroglu may be further in advantage of the president?
That's definitely true, and that's what we're hearing from a lot of people. They want solutions to the challenges. There are major challenges in Turkey, economy, reconstruction from the earthquake, education, many other issues. And they want politics to attend to them as soon as possible. And they want some sort of stability. They were actually, I've heard so many people disappointed that, it didn't end in the first round. My expectation as an analyst was it was definitely going to go to the second round, especially İnce was the fourth candidate. He pulled out in the last minute. So there was a possibility it could end in the first round, but I still didn't expect it to end in the first round. But I didn't expect Erdogan to do this well. I expected, something like 47, 48. And then I was thinking whoever is ahead is going to have the, psychological advantage. So it surprised me at that level. But like you said, they don't want a divided government. They don't have much of an experience of that, right? The presidential system is relatively new to Turkey. It's not like in the US. So they don't want a majority in the parliament being in the hands of opposition and then president, being in power. That kind of dichotomy in the past, during coalition governments in the 90s, there were problems like the president would block the passage of some legislation, some initiatives. So they remember those dates and they don't want that kind of divide the government. Like you said, the People's Alliance now has the majority in the parliament, and they are going to be able to pass legislation if they want. Of course, to make major changes like the constitutional change, they're going to need 2/3 and they will have to reach out to other parties, but they can govern. So that gives them definitely additional advantage to Erdogan, because if he has the majority in the parliament and then as part of the coalition, so if he wins, then the government will run smoothly, and people do want stability and smooth governance for the next, 5 years.
The third candidate, Sinan Oğan, got something like 2.5 million votes. And, especially in the Western media, some people believe that he will be the one who will determine the result, which I completely do not agree. Because, it's not, Sinan Oğan cannot control his voters. These are most votes of protest. These were the protest votes. And probably these people will not follow the instructions from Sinan Oğan. If he says, okay, I'm going to support this candidate, I don't think people will follow. But it seems that, as you mentioned, Kilicdaroglu decided, his eyes on the right-wing votes, especially anti-immigrant, the Victory Zafer Party. But he got 1.4, the votes of the party whose platform is sending Syrians back home. They got 1.4. So the President Erdogan said he's not going to campaign this week, and he will visit the quake zones and, will thank to the people and try to, ease their pain, which became an issue again. Maybe I should mention after the election results, when 9 of the 11 quake zone cities, some opposition followers, CHP members, started to curse on the quake victims. They used actually hate speech against quake victims. So it seems that President Erdogan will focus on the quake zone, but Kilicdaroglu is going to use this anti-Syrian, anti-refugee, anti-immigrant policy. Do you think this will help Kilicdaroglu to get these 2.5 million votes, or do you think these votes will go to the candidate according to the voters' their own decision?
Bora, like you said, there have been some really, really unfortunate, shameful comments. So I hope, people come to their senses, because it's dangerous to blame, immigrants for the ills of the country. That's a very dangerous route to take. And, there is, of course, discomfort about the refugee issue in Turkey overall, and that cuts across parties. It's not just one party that, there are many issues surrounding that, and that needs to be dealt with for sure. But an anti sort of refugee platform, especially 10 days to the second round, ahead of the second round, it just feels like desperation to me, because like you said, Sinan Oğan's voters actually come from 5-6 at least different parties, and about 25%, I think I've seen one study come from AK Party voters, and he's received 2.5 million. If only 20% of his voters voted for Erdogan, that was enough in the first round for Erdogan. So I think second round's psychology will be very different. I don't think you can just take 5% of Sinan Oğan and add it to Kilicdaroglu's 45. It's just not going to work like that. It's going to be only, people are going to go to the ballot box motivated to vote for Kilicdaroglu or Erdogan. And that's a different dynamic than voting for a party like Victory Party, like you said, who is very anti-immigrant, and then on top of it, voting for a presidential candidate. In the second round, that's not the dynamic. In the second round, people are going to look at who is capable of running the country, who has a better chance of solving our issues, and who is the winner. I mean, people do want to vote for the winner, and that was clear in the first round. So it's just, I think all opposition efforts are going to have to focus on maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, to be honest, but the defeat to be somewhat, not too bad. So that's what they will have to hope for, because I don't see opposition voters going in huge numbers to the polls. And imagine this, May 14th was the day that all opposition in Turkey mobilized.
Yeah, I mean,
so, even with that, Kilicdaroglu couldn't attract enough numbers to beat Erdogan.
You remember, after the election results were clear, President Erdogan went to his party headquarters in Ankara, and he made a speech. He gave a speech. It was like a victory speech, and the headquarters was packed with people, with flags, and they were in joy and they were kind of celebrating. After an hour or so, we have seen opposition candidate Kilicdaroglu in a small room, watched by maybe a bunch of journalists and maybe less than 100 party supporters, and the headquarters was empty. The headquarters, there was no supporters, there was no joy. So it was, when you look at those two pictures, on the one side it was a winner picture, and the other side we have seen a loser picture. So I think, as you said, it will be very difficult for the opposition to bring people to the ballot box. Plus, Kilicdaroglu was supported by former HDP, this Green and Left Party. These people went to vote for their party as well. Now the question is, will they go for only voting for the president, for Kilicdaroglu? Even I think these things will play a role. And as you said, we have experienced ourselves the polls. There was motivation, especially in the opposition side. People were motivated. They flooded into the ballot box, and you could feel it. But I think, especially when we look at the politicians from the opposition, journalists, the mood is not there to mobilize people again that much. So we'll see. Yeah.
My apologies. You reminded me that that night and next day, actually, I spoke to a lot of our party officials and people involved in the campaign. They were actually not jubilant, right? Because I was like, this is a great result. Like, it's much better than I expected. Why is that? And then they were like, well, we didn't win. So that shows you, like, meaning that we didn't go over the 50% for President Erdogan. Like, the party takes these things seriously. They really wanted that to end in the first round. Like, President Erdogan's speech that night, like you said, it was a balcony speech, and it was thanking the supporters that, who put him at the forefront of this race. But he didn't declare victory. And he didn't, he said in his other interviews as well, that, the job is not done. So what I'm trying to point out is, this is a party that takes these races seriously, right? They're not going to feel like, oh, we'll win anyway. I don't see that type of lack of seriousness. And they've already started campaigning for the second round. So it's going to be a hard thing for the opposition to bring, like, if they can keep the margin somewhat close, that's going to be success for them. And like you said, people in the opposition don't have a lot of reasons to, be celebrate. I mean, they don't have a lot of reasons to really be motivated, let alone celebrate.
Before we finish, let's look at the parliament, the new party, the new welfare party. Now they are in the parliament. The E party, they are now, they didn't make the jump they were expecting. And former HDP, now they are under 10%. Do you have anything to say about these three parties?
Very quickly, especially E party, right? The leader, Meral Akşener, she had serious reservations about Kilicdaroglu's candidacy. And at some point, it was a big deal. She left the table of 6. Within a couple of days, she returned and she brought in Ankara and Istanbul mayors. And people made an argument that actually the opposition was even stronger thanks to that. And since the election night, she has refused to make a statement. I mean, that's very telling that the unity within the opposition was choppy. I mean, it wasn't there. If you want to bring down a, leader like Erdogan, it's very difficult unless you have a truly united front. And that wasn't there. And E party has been losing support since they've sat down at that table of 6. That's what actually their party people are complaining about. It hasn't really worked for them. Like you said, they have gotten less MPs than MHP, the Nationalist Party on the side of Erdogan. So it's, I don't know how they're going to be motivated for the second round. And then the HDP, the Green Sol Party, Green Left Party, right now as it is called, the pro-Kurdish party, I think they lost some votes to Turkish Labour Party, the new kind of party that was able to inspire some of the young voters, but they only, I think, received something like 1%, 1.5%. The lowering of the threshold, which used to be 10%, now it's 7%, basically got rid of some of the votes that were going to HDP, the pro-Kurdish party, to make sure that they enter the parliament. So now they're back to their actual votes. It's largely regional, southeast of Turkey, they have their. And then for the new welfare party, they've done, I think, somewhat better than expected. They got 2.8%. And that shows you kind of, there are people who are on the more conservative side who were upset about the alliance between the conservative party on Kilicdaroglu's side. So they didn't, they basically probably went to New Welfare Party instead of being seen as voting for the, CHP, who has a very strong and, secularist history. So it's going to be an interesting combination. There are going to be many smaller parties now in the parliament. So in that sense, it's going to be very representative of the, preferences of the Turkish electorate. So, but again, the coalition, the alliance, if it stays the way it does, right, it should stay. There's no reason for it to break up for the ruling, alliance. They have the majority, but the opposition's alliance has already shown serious cracks, because CHP gave all those MPs to smaller parties, and then E party is not happy about this situation. I expect after the second round, major internal kind of fights in the opposition.
Well, we'll see what will happen, especially on 28th of May. Maybe we can have a better picture. Kadir, thank you very much for your analysis. I think next week we will be still talking about the elections. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bora, for your analysis. And it was great to be in Istanbul during the election. So
yeah, it's an experience.
Yes, next time, Bora.
Thank you. Bye-bye.